Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you about the basics of formatting your papers correctly in APA 7th edition. The format has to do with the physical setup of the paper, the spacing, the indenting, the margins, the title page, the reference page, etc. And we'll go over all of that in detail. It's important to remember that the format is a necessary element of the paper and that an incorrectly formatted paper can lead to misinterpretation of the information being presented and thus a lower grade. So it's important to understand what you need to do and what the guidelines are. First, I'd like to point out that in preparing your paper, you'll need to determine whether it should be set up as a professional paper or as a student paper. On the first slide, we see the APA 7th edition professional version of a title page. The difference between that and a student paper is that at the top left, you'll have the words running head and an abbreviated title, right? For the 7th edition student version, the setup is the same, except you do not have the words running head and an abbreviated title at the top left. This is the more commonly used paper, the student version. For the general outlines of the format of an APA paper in 7th edition, you will have 1-inch margins, double spacing, indenting of each paragraph, Times New Roman font style, size 12 font type. So on the title page here, you have your page header at the top right, which is your page number. The title page is always page number 1. You have your paper title in bold. About 3 to 4 lines below your title will be your name. And then there'll be 5 lines, including your name, that will be double spaced. Your name, the department, comma, Malloy University, the number of the course, colon, the title of the course, the instructor's name, and the due date of the paper. That's the standard format of a title page. An abstract, if included, is found on page 2 of the paper. So the title page is always page number 1, and the abstract, if required, is page 2. You would have to follow your professor's guidelines as to whether one is needed for the specific paper you're writing. Usually an abstract is required with lengthy papers because there's more material to cover. It's generally not required in 1 to 2 page papers, such as an article summary or a book review. An abstract gives the reader an overview of what will be covered in the paper. The format is shown here on this slide. The word abstract is centered and bolded. The page header appears at the top right, number 2. It is usually limited to 1 paragraph. It's double spaced, and it's the 1 paragraph in the paper that's not indented. It usually contains such language as this paper will address or analyze or evaluate or discuss such and such topic. You can also include keywords. So following your abstract summary, you would have words that appear repeatedly throughout the paper. You would italicize the word keywords, put a colon, and then list those words, all in lowercase. On the page following the abstract, you would start the content of your paper.
When using APA 7th edition, it's always important to include in-text citations in your papers. In-text citations are used to provide the reader of your paper with knowledge that you have used other authors' ideas in your paper. So in-text citations are something that we see often in APA papers, and we're encouraged to include those in-text citations. APA papers are typically used to write scholarly research papers or scholarly findings. So we often have to conduct research in order to create those papers. So for in-text citation, there's a few ways for you to create them for the 7th APA edition. So when paraphrasing, you will create an in-text citation that includes the author's last name and the year of publication for the reference. This should be included in your citation. So you'll see below Bennett, 2009. So when we're taking information from an author and we're writing it in our own words, that's paraphrasing. So that type of citation, the example under when paraphrasing needs to be used. When we directly quote, when we're taking information from an author and we can't change the words, or the words that the author expressed the idea in just have to be presented in the paper in the order that they're found, you would include a direct quote. So when we're directly quoting, there are special in-text citations that need to be used. So you would include the page number at the end of the parenthetical citation, after the author's last name and the year of publication. For pages, you will abbreviate pages to P period if you're using one page, or PP period if you're using multiple pages. You'll use a dash if you're ranging between pages. So if you're using information that ranges from page 199 to 201 and you're directly quoting it in your paper, you will have to present that information in your citation. So the examples are below. Bennett, 2009, P period 1. That means that I'm directly quoting information from Bennett 2009 on the first page. For the second example, Bennett, 2009, PP period 199 to 201. I'm including that in my citation because that means that the quote that I am putting in my paper comes from pages 199 to 201. So it's important that we give credit to the author where we took that information, especially when we're directly quoting. When we're paraphrasing, the page information is not needed or necessary, but when we are directly quoting, it has to be included. So when using in-text citations, there's two ways to give credit to an author. There's the narrative citation. The narrative citation includes the author's last name when you're writing your sentence. So that last name of the author and the year is worked right into the grammar of your sentence. So an example of that for paraphrasing would be Bennett 2009 argues for a more flexible approach in the case of PTSD patients. So remember from the slide before, we said that a page number is not needed or necessary when we're paraphrasing information. So if we're paraphrasing information and we're referring to the author while doing so, we would write it as that example. If we're directly quoting and we're going to use a narrative citation, we would say, according to Bennett 2009, and then we would quote the information. A less rigid methodology is better for PTSD patients, and then end it with P period 200 or the page number of which you found that information. Because remember on the previous slide, whenever we're directly quoting an author's work, we have to give credit to the page number on which we found that information. The second way to give credit to an author when we're creating in-text citations for our papers is using a parenthetical citation. An example of a parenthetical citation is below when paraphrasing. For PTSD patients, a flexible approach is recommended. So then you would include Bennett, 2009 for your paraphrased parenthetical citation. If you're directly quoting, same thing, we have to include the page number. So if we state a direct quote from an author, like the one on the screen, a less rigid methodology is better for PTSD patients, we have to include the parenthetical citation at the end. Bennett, 2009, P period 200. Because you have to remember that when you're doing any type of direct quoting, whether you're working it into a parenthetical or a narrative citation, you do have to refer to the page number that was used to find the information.
In-text citing tells the reader whose information you're using. The reference page documents the types of sources you use and where and how you found them. We're looking at the sample of a reference page in APA format, and you can see the layout. The page numbering continues all the way through to the reference page, upper right-hand corner. The word references is bolded and centered. Now each entry is alphabetical by author or first position, and the first line begins at the left margin. When you add the information to identify your source completely, you'll probably go over more than one line, sometimes 2 or 3 lines. Those lines have to be indented. The subsequent lines are tabbed in once, and that's called the hanging indent. Now this reference page just shows you the layout, what it should physically look like. It's double spaced, 1-inch margins all around, just like the rest of the paper. And now I'm going to share with you some Writing Center resources that will help you do your in-text citing and build a references page. So as was explained before about the difference between paraphrasing and direct quoting and the narrative citation and parenthetical citation, this page goes on to explain other situations that can come up while you're giving in-text citing. APA has rules for a variety of situations and circumstances. So I just want to point out some of the common ones. Very often, you might have a resource that does not have an author or an unknown author. And so the sheet here explains what that's all about and how you would address it with in-text citing. You can see that when we don't have an author, we can list an entry by the title of the source. And then if we list it by title on the references page, we use the title for the in-text citation, the title and the date. And then there's the circumstance where there's no date available. And so these first 5 pages or so address various situations, citations of a work discussed. So our sheets are very thorough. They're based on the APA manual itself. These are very hands-on documents, and you can download them yourself by visiting the Writing Center website. So I'm scrolling over to page 5, which is how to build the references page. The key to building a reference page is knowing what kind of resources you have. And what I mean by that is you can say, I have a book. I have some information from a book that I'm using in my research, and as is illustrated on our APA handout here, okay, you have a book, but there are different kinds of books. Edited book with no authors, article and chapter in an edited book with authors. And I'm pointing this out to you because when the kind of source is different, the template is going to change a little bit. And thank goodness we don't have to memorize these things. We need to know what exactly we're looking at, and then we can follow the template. The order of information, what gets capitalized, what does not, what gets italics, okay? And I'd like to point out the signature characteristic of APA. If you notice the way the titles are written, okay, in both cases, okay, this one here that's in italics, in both cases, different kinds of sources, a different format, but they both have the same quality of capitalizing the title. The titles in APA format are not capitalized according to the way we were all taught in standard English grammar. Only the first letter of the first word of the title is capitalized, unless of course you're using proper nouns. Okay, I'm going to scoot over to page 6, which begins the listings for electronic sources, which is what most of us use all the time. And the first example is the journal article with a DOI. So this is a scholarly journal article, and the journal itself is a peer-reviewed journal. And you can see that the information that makes up a peer-reviewed journal article is different from the books. Okay, and the standard format for all kinds of sources is creator or author, publication date, and title. After that, the subsequent information is going to vary according to the type of resource you're using. All electronic sources will have a DOI or a URL. In this case, the DOI is in the URL. Okay? All electronic sources will need an electronic signature. That needs to be part of the reference that you write up. And I'm just scrolling through the types of sources and the templates that are listed on the Writing Center APA sheets. This is not an exhaustive list. These are the most common resources that people are using. Therefore, I recommend getting the APA manual because the references section covers the hundreds of research materials that you could use in your own research. But we try to cover as much, as possible, right through to YouTube videos and tweets and Facebook. Now I want to show you this APA model for what your paper will physically look like when you're ready to submit. This sheet is also found on the website. You can download it yourself. Here we have the cover page that was explained at the beginning of this presentation. Page 1, all the information there. Page 2, the abstract, if needed. That's what that will look like on page 2. Page 3 is the beginning of the text of your paper. You see the repetition of the title from the cover page. Begins page 3, and then finally the reference page. So as I said, these handouts are available on the Writing Center website. The website is a great resource, and even better than that, why don't you come down to the Writing Center in KCO 16 and pick up some hard copies of these resources and spend some time with us, and we can help you with the APA research documentation style.